yet again, it's Adi's genius as much as that of the two speakers that is evident here because of the scheduling of these two papers together. And I just wanted to ask you each to reflect on. I mean, just as Mohamed is trying to bypass French theory, I take it that Susan is trying to bypass Kant's division of the faculties, and that the rationale is for these gestures of bypassing is very similar. This is what I took. One of the things that I took, but the thing that I wanted to ask you about was another extraordinary, I thought, collision in the two papers, and that is these two extraordinary images of extra state being that you both summoned up. Susan's, of course, that image of the of capital vacating the arena of the state, and Mohamed's equally extraordinary story about Kamel and the zone of annihilation and the notion of a kind of citizenship for non-citizens. And I just kind of wanted to ask you both to, in a sense, reflect on those two, the conjunction of those two images in each other's paper, and perhaps how important and significant they are for the work that you're each doing in these two really, really thoughtful projects.
So thank you. Yeah, I was amazed how they went together. And I think that's a brilliant point to put them together. Because, I mean, what I think we're seeing is that if we stay in the categories of nation state, and unfortunately some of really good theorists of neoliberalism, for instance, I'm thinking of Wendy Brown. I actually heard her in a film say that you can't think democracy without the nation state. So this kind of wedding to, but nation state now is precisely an inhibition of thought, because what's really going on is not there, and we kid ourselves if we think that we're getting at what's really important if we stay in those kinds of situations. And I love the fact that this idea of being of doing away with Kant's division is not necessarily going beyond, it's also going before, or going alongside of, or going someplace else. And also the idea of the animation of a line as a circle or a line. I mean, I think those are extraordinary that they went together. Did you know what it was we were going to do? Because I didn't know what I was going to do. So this is really quite amazing. Do you want to?
Well, the secret thing that Adi knows is that I'm a very Hegelian, anti-Hegelian.
So
but I think you're in the same kind of place, right?
Yeah.
Which I maybe, hopefully I will answer one of Tim's question that way, is that I said bypassing French theory because, of course, we were talking about this space. And also because, of course, there were many concepts that specifically come from that tradition that are very close or similar to some of the things I described. Reda Mensmaya, who's here, our colleague, said something that I think is very should be thought, and that we should think through the consequences of that. Is that if you read someone like Kateb Yassin, you would quite rapidly go almost immediately to Deleuzian concepts, such as difference in repetition, and so on and so forth. But the thing is that if you look at the chronologies, if you will, Kateb comes first, right?
Yeah.
So to speak. Of course, I mean, the fact of saying that this was before and so on is not sufficient as an argument, but it gives us an indication of the fact of the contribution of these kinds of works that are not explicitly philosophical in an academic way, that were part of precisely the constellation of events that happened when the unholy trinity emerged, that is to say Foucault, Derrida, and Deleuze. So instead of just putting these words, or these names rather, as so-called certainties, on these texts, we should try and do the other way around, right? We should try and operate the other way around. Which means, of course, not rejecting these concepts, but really provincializing them. And at some point, it must be done also with Fanon himself. Because he's, especially The Wretched of the Earth, is a book that was written by, I mean, first of all, it was not written because it was spoken first, but it's a collective book. It's really, there are multiple voices in that book. And we have to precisely unearth them, if you will, to make sense of what we can sort of rethink or redeploy, if you will, in this text, from our time, right? Extra states being, so therefore also, the other thing is that I was focusing on that for this specific contextual reason, but I was first trained in so-called German idealism. So that's also my point of not departure, because my point of departure is somewhere else. But that was the first thing that, to respond to the violence of the canon, I started there because I thought it was the most strategic point to dismantle the system, actually.
I mean, through Deleuzian or Derridian perspective, I've always said that, in fact, they were Khatibian.
That's right, exactly.
Without
this
knowing.
is what I was trying to say, but you said
and
it
in a way,
in a much more...
I say that because
yes,
what
yes.
happens is that when you say,
yes.
I am a Hegelian and anti-Hegelian.
No, yes, I know, but that was a joke.
That's good, but as you know, for example, what dominated let's say, criticism in our domain, literature.
Yes.
It was what?
Yes.
A kind of what I would call an echo chamber.
Yes.
Where you had all the philosophers that
yes,
you named.
Yes.
And when you look at their references,
yeah.
all of them have the same references. It's Mallarmé.
Yes.
You know, of course, Bataille, because he wrote something which is not only philosophical, but the others are always the same. Antonin Artaud and Maurice Blanchot. And tell me when one of them has quoted Khatib Yassine or Khatibi.
That's what we're talking about. Yeah.
You see, so we have to reverse the whole thing. My reading of so-called Francophone literature has never been to apply.
I know, yeah. No,
it's in fact to reveal.
This is what I was trying to say, but maybe I did not make the point.
Germinating.
So that's what I wanted to say.
John. Is this working? Is this working? So thank you for two very inspiring papers. I'm afraid my question is for Susan. And I'd just like to hear, I'm going to ask to hear more about the use of the word hallucination. And then sort of put that request in the context of things I read from what I heard. So we are via concepts in a sort of hallucination of abstract universality. And also I heard that this was concentrated in the leader, that the here, now, sort of retreats and gets concentrated in the leader. So that we had the example you gave, the one that's very pertinent at the moment, is that it's concentrated in a particular moment yesterday. So that's immediate, and it was mediated. But the other examples of sort of immediacy or access to immediacy via mediation are from photography, which is now subject to what is technically called, probably a misnomer, which is why I'm asking about the word hallucination. So that a photograph that I see at the moment on my phone, I cannot be sure that it is not hallucinated in that technological sense. Right. And so what has happened to immediacy? What has happened to my access to the this, here, now, other than as concentrated in the leader?
Right. So that's a great question. And of course, there is something in the discourse of artificial intelligence that talks about hallucinations. When AI gives you something that's totally hallucinatory. That's the word they use, right? So it's really interesting. But I think that ultimately, we're not going to be able to say there's the real and then the hallucinatory. Those distinctions are going to have to go. And in a certain sense, if you watch the repeat of what happened in the Oval Office on Fox versus on CNN or MSNBC, the editing was clever on Fox. They couldn't really succeed in making it okay, but they made it, quote, better. And so we don't use this as a, we have to use this in a different way. And actually, I think some of it is the gut reaction that you have. In other words, there's a kind of sensibility, and I loved in these examples that you could not leave out the bodily. So it's not just mediation, but it's also the whole human being who is responding in one way or another, and that even that kind of humanness can occupy a line or a circle. I mean, I find that very powerful and something that we shouldn't be afraid of. I mean, in the you know, these people are now a little bit on the chopping block, that is Hegel, Kant, whatever. There was this kind of real, because if you're talking, and let's give them the benefit of something, this was the Republic of Letters that they were entering. And they were not being German or French or this or that. They were sharing through the abstraction of the word, the capacity for something that aimed toward the universal. I mean, it's a beautiful, you can get very nostalgic about the Enlightenment. But ladies and gentlemen, it's over. And so we have to deal with what we've got, and we've got some real advantages. That's the point. We've got some real advantages, and that doesn't mean that it's all going to be roses, but these technologies give us new possibilities. And they correct certain problems of the past, and they give us other ones. So that doesn't mean you have to stop thinking. But so that's what I would say.
And particularly as you were talking about the play in which there is a corpse that is not a corpse in the center of the circle, I kept thinking about another kind of aesthetic experience that is produced not by people who understand themselves as part of an artistic community, but by common people in their everyday lives. And that is the public funeral. Mm-hmm. And the extent to which a public funeral is an aesthetic display. And it is produced collectively, it is produced in general by the commons. I'm thinking principally of public funerals in the Middle East, but it's really kind of generally true. And also certain kinds of inadvertent productions. And here I'm thinking about the what is it called? The video of the death of Yahya Sinwar. And these are, I mean, the inadvertency is one question, and it's an interesting interpretive question, but I think not as interesting in light of your account, is the production of an aesthetic, artistic experience in which the ethical, the political, and the aesthetic are not bounded, and which is, it seems to have all the qualities you want, and to escape these distinctions about the literary. And I wonder if you could comment on this a little bit.
Thank you very much. Actually, this is, this is great. The first thing I should say is that le cadavre encerclé, so the encircled corpse, for the lack of a better translation, I think can be seen actually as a public funeral of a very strange kind. Sorry?
But it's so small and so, frankly, precious.
What is precious?
The theater.
Oh.
It's, it's
but it is not okay. So I should say a few other words about what was going on. First of all, they were quote unquote common people. So even I'm talking about the MTA, so the Arab worker movements. There were, quote unquote, common people. It was not, when I say there were artists, it was both true and completely false, because they were common people who were practicing what they were practicing politics poetically, if you will. To some extent, you could use the expression of public funeral to describe this piece. Let's not call it a theater piece. Let's call it a tragedy that is more than theater, which is called le cadavre encerclé. And at some point, precisely so, there is the circle around the corpse, and there is a corps, un chœur, right? Le chœur tragique, which is cure, right? Chorus. A chorus that actually, when Glissant wrote about this text, that people don't really know that Glissant wrote about that and had not only great admiration for Kateb Yassine, but was one of his sources of inspiration. He really talks about the fact that tragedy is not only redeployed, it's redeployed as a real political practice, because it now is linked to the entire humanity, right? Which is like this typical idea that comes or is made possible by Bandung, if you will. And this thing about, so what you're referring to, the fact of escaping the distinctions or making them implode while uniting them, if you will, or creating networks between them. So I mean the dimensions of the politics, the artistic, and the ethical, if you will. There is a word I quoted, which I use and use sometimes in actually my second book is about that, but it's not translated into English, which is the concept of barzakh, which we talked about last year actually, which is difficult to translate. It means the space of dream or another scene, if you will. But it also refers to something that is, and this is what interests me, quasi or both both anti-dialectical and dialectical, if you will, because it helps some philosophers, so if you will, Islamic philosophers, for the lack of a better word, to think about something that I think German idealism only thought about much later. And it comes also from the fact that there is a quote unquote or so-called mystical matrix to both of them. And of course, in the case of German idealism, it's Meister Eckhart. But let's put this aside. This concept means something that is liminal, so between not only spaces, but between divides, boundaries, binaries, life, death, being, non-being. Presence, absence, and so on and so forth. The thing that we always do at the end or the beginning of a talk, which is, I'm going to dismantle this or that divide, and so on and so forth. But once you say that, to say that you're going to dissolve a divide, it means that you need it, because you have to first deploy the divide to identify what you want to dismantle, criticize, nuance, whatever that is. So the movement, it's not just like, you dismantle the divide and that's the result, and end of the story, you have the result. If that was the case, we would never do this, since we keep doing this on and on, right? So there is an intellectual tradition that I'm trying to draw on, which is, and this was not exactly clear because I didn't have time to do this, but that is an intellectual tradition of the person who resisted the French army between 1832 and 1846. Who's called Abdul Qadir. Nobody, people know him, but he's very marginalized. And people forget that he was not only a political figure, but also a metaphysician. He wrote metaphysical, philosophical books. So, therefore, the unity of theory and praxis that many people are looking for, there are, and since he's not the only one, but there are places where we can look that actually enables us to actually do the work we sometimes want to do, but we don't really give ourselves the conditions to do it, which is look at other archives, and so on and so forth. But the thing is that we have to sort of create a sort of fictional oblivion, what I was calling bypassing. This is bypassing something. It doesn't mean to say that you reject it. It means that you try and find some other beginning that will allow you to sort of go back to what you learned first in a very different way, right? So that's, which is even the movement that is exactly what I was talking about, or liminality, or Balzac. So this is what I would, I mean, this is what I'm working on. We're supposed to do experimental things here, right? So this is my experimentation.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. Not that what I have to say needs amplifying, because I was just silly. I wanted to ask you both to reflect on the word singular, which appears in your talks in different places in the argument, but it bears a lot of weight. And in both cases, it's a term, I take it, that you're using in contradistinction to unit and unitary and the one. And I wonder if that works, and I suspect it doesn't. That is, I think that the singular is always going to be residually the one, and have a kind of tendency to become precisely that sort of unitary, sovereign position that you want to exile and throw out of the new republic or the new commons. So I wonder if you could think about whether it's possible to rely on the singular as an operator in your arguments in quite this way, or whether you need to maybe do something else. Like not rely on the singular.
Because I don't really use the singular. I don't think.
You ended on the singular world.
Yeah.
I did?
The cosmopolitics, at least I understood it.
No, the line was a singular world.
It was? I mean, what I want is a concrete, particular world. I want a world where the specificities are not emptied out. And singular says to me something a little different. So I don't hear myself in that word. But God knows what I said. I know. So, but I do want to say that, you know, in this loss of the Republic of Letters, I mean, we're trying to work against that with the talks that we're trying. The whole post-colonial movement is really to try to work against the limitations of the Republic of Letters, which was a European project and an Enlightenment project. But it's motivated by the same desire, which is a desire that you know, is, you know, the best that we as humans can be, and let's even talk about the public good or the common good, which is not, and universality as abstraction didn't give us that. So the turn to the singular, to me, maybe in the photographs, I want to see the specificity, and I cannot, I mean, I begin by seeing skin color, and then I have to go under the skin and just see the turn of a body, the shape of something, the youth. I mean, someone like me looking at these images, the beauty of the youth. I mean, it's so, and that's singular perhaps. So you're so aware, you're able to see and pay attention to the specificity. I would use again that word, that it opens up a whole world that moving toward the universal as a project, as Hegel's project tried to obliterate. So it puts the category of the universal in a totally, or the unitary, in a totally different space. It's not the goal, it's the problem. It's the problem. And if our categories can't cope with the specificity of individuality that is captured, I mean, the voice, have you noticed how a voice, I can have the TV on, it's a confession, I can have the TV on and I know who's speaking as a moderator or whatever. I know the voices are so specific. It's amazing how specific they are. And I know they can be copied by AI, but not so well. It's very difficult. So there is this kind of capacity to appreciate the individual, which makes, in a certain sense, the world much more intimate, despite the fact that we're seeing further. And this, I mean, you know, because my first understanding of this mediation was that it makes for the capacity to kill people from a distance and, you know, do all kinds of horrible things. So there's that side of it, but there's also this capacity to actually, I mean, you know, to look at photographs, to look at films, and to see something in its specificity, which is not art. It doesn't have to be art versus documentary, but some other meaning of the singular. Did you want to?
We will shorten the lunch break.
Did you want to?
You want to respond?
I would like to say something.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Certainly.
Very quickly, even though this is an immense question, I don't want to, it doesn't work. It's good news that it doesn't work because it's not what I want to do. I don't want to get rid of I mean, let's say not the one, because that's the thing. There are multiple concepts of unicity or monadological concepts, for the lack of a better word. And I certainly do not want to begin with the premise that we should get rid of the one, or that we should deploy a philosophy of multiplicity. That was one of the founding assumptions of not all French theory, but, you know, certainly some parts of Deleuzian metaphysics, even though then there is this sort of debate between him and Badiou and so on, that in fact he sort of redeploys the one. But you can make this argument to the extent that, you know, one of the claims he's making is to try and abolish the figure of the one. You cannot, I mean, there are many things to say, and thank you for asking this question, but it's impossible if you want to rethink, not against the Western canon of theory, but rather to see how what the Western canon is a westernized canon, and how it has always been in conversation with what is called, you know, Islamic philosophy or Andalusian philosophy, Jewish Islamic philosophy. If you just start from the premise that the one should be abolished, because then you're going to just exclude actually these traditions of thought and to disallow yourself, if you will, to think through them, right? And I think that going back to someone like Al-Kindi, who's absolutely extraordinary in my view, his argument is an analysis of the fact that the one is not really a rigorous concept, because there are multiple concepts of unity, and actually there is a distinction between unicity, uniqueness, unity, that really pluralizes this question. And when you just say the one is the one, or even the one is God, actually, this is already a problem. And I think instead of going back to the sort of game of who is, you know, really able to think the multiple without the one, I think we should start to try and do something else. And there is something political, I think, about that, even though it sounds very abstract, is the fact that, and this is deliberately simple, because I think it has to be simple. If you read people like Fanon, but basically all anti-colonial thinkers, the question is how to unify the people. The fact of saying, well, you know, the people doesn't exist, it's just like multiplicities, makes sense. Made sense afterwards, probably, you know, in Europe during the 70s and so on and so forth. But it doesn't mean to say that this is a universalizable political stake or political project. And I think that precisely in a real anti-colonial struggle, the question is how you unify. And one of the reasons why some of them failed is because precisely of fragmentation, which, you know, is one of the very simple but important things that Fanon actually says in The Wretched of the Earth, right? So trying to be faithful to that as well, if you will.
Thank you.
There's so many things to say.
Choose one.
So I want to go back to the question that John raised about like technology and media and the specter that you have a photo and you don't know if it's real or not, right? Because like you could be stuck in a hallucination because of AI, right? And your response, Susan, was that the Enlightenment is gone, right? So we have to think about like we have now, and we can't make a distinction between hallucination and the real, right?
We can, but go ahead. Yeah.
We can, and I think that that's important, right? I think we can, and I wonder, like, so your move, the picture that you put up when you had the space of appearance was of, you know, the civil rights, you know, the gathering at the monument, right? The iconic civil rights movement photo. And one of the things that popped into my mind is that like, when we think about the people coming together, the scale is so large, right? And there's something about scale here that I think, and technology and the refusal of manual labor, the sort of the ways in which nature is devalued, the mass bigness when we think about the power of people, that kind of gets us in the trouble of losing track of our senses that give us a sense of reality. And I'm wondering, and you also said we need to move away from the nation state. And I find myself, you know, really sympathetic to Brown. And it's not that I'm wedded to a nation state, but wedded to a bounded community, local, feeling the relation between each other, that being a necessary check against the scale of technology, the manipulation of the senses, the manipulation of what's real, because it's through our bodies, right, that we are able to discern, you know, between the manipulative and the actual. And, you know, when we talk about the real, we can't possibly be talking about objective reality in a sort of like empiricist sense, right? That was always a problematic view of what it meant to approximate and to have access to the real. But we have to think about the real as something that one gets through discernment and judgment and the right relation with each other. So what do you think about that, like scale and locale and like, yeah, in terms of your sense of the now?
Yeah. Thanks for that, because it's important. Caveat to what I was putting forward, but and there were some pictures that I took out which talk a little bit about this, in the sense that what I think is it begins in 2003, where people say no to war, in this action where everybody, and this idea that there is no West because you just go around the circle of the planet. And this circling of the planet by a movement that said no to war. This was just before the US invaded. It was February 15th, 2003, just before the US did invade Iraq. Everybody's uploading pictures. For the first time we tried to do this, and it was done grassroots, of their demonstration against the war. And it was in, I think, how many countries, how many cities, you know what I'm referring to, and it was awesome. And I remember being in California at the time, and people came off the streets because, you know, they were late in the day, and they said, the world said no to war. Well, obviously, war happened the next day, but the world did say no to war. And so those things are held together. And what I mean by that, and that was a sense of the global, but then the antithesis, oh God, that's a Hegelian thing. The local of that is 2011, when people had local movements. Tahrir Square was about the local community, the sense of being together. The Gezi demonstrations in Turkey were extraordinary by this coming together, this sense of being together, not as a nation, nationalist, but a being together that was absolutely personal and shared. And the technology of internet allowed people to know when the police were going someplace or whatever. And all of this was first invented, right, by people on the street. At the same time, they showed us in live time what they were doing. So it was both internal, connecting individuals, and then external, saying to the rest of the world, we're here and we're doing this. And the Arab world does it first. And then people say, me too, right? In the sense of for instance, certainly in Wall Street, it came as a direct response to that. And those experiments, to me, are a potential, not of a global anything, because global is a word that's been captured by capitalism, but a planetary, because that keeps the emphasis on why we have to all work together, right? This planetary possibility of a democratic response to the absurdity of the contemporary order. I mean, what we're seeing with Trump is the end of the American empire, and desto besser, so much for the better, right? But we're finding that comes down, and there's because it was the empire that didn't call itself an empire, as opposed to the one before Bandung that wanted to be an empire. But those things are now gone, and we're into this world of capitalism and what? And here I think the public is a scale that can be local, very specific, and also can be planetary.
Thank you, Susan. I do not dare to steal more minutes from the next sessions. So thank you very much for this.